took the maintenance job at Ridgemont Apartments in the summer of 1976 because it came with a rent-free basement unit, and I needed to disappear for a while. The building was 8 floors, built sometime in the 50s, and it had that particular smell old apartment buildings get when the same carpet has been there since construction. The kind of smell that settles into the walls and becomes part of the air itself. You stop noticing it after a few days, but it is always there underneath everything else. A mixture of old cooking, dust, and time. The super who hired me was a man named Carl, maybe 60, with hands that looked like they had been fixing things since before I was born. His fingers were thick and scarred, and he moved through the building like he knew every pipe and wire by heart. He walked me through the building on my first day and told me the only rule that mattered. Never go into the utility corridors after dark. Not the basement. Not the sub-basement. Not the crawl spaces behind the walls. He said it flat, like he was telling me not to park in the loading zone. And when I asked why, he just looked at me and said, "Some of the older tenants get confused at night and wander." He said if I heard anyone back there, I should radio him, not investigate. Then he handed me the keys and left. The job was easy for the first month. Replacing washers and faucets, unclogging drains, changing light bulbs in the hallways, patching drywall where tenants had hung things too heavy for the anchors. Yet the tenants were mostly elderly people who had lived there since the building opened, and a few younger families who could not afford anything better. I kept to myself, and I kept the hours Carl suggested, which meant I was done by 4 in the afternoon and never touched anything after sunset. I liked the routine. It was simple and predictable, and no one asked questions about where I had come from or why I needed the job. But in late August, the air conditioning unit on the 6th floor went out during a heat wave, and Carl was visiting his sister upstate. The tenant in 612 called the emergency line at 9 at night, an old woman who sounded like she was barely breathing in the heat, and I could not just let her cook. The temperature outside was still in the high 80s, and inside her apartment it had to be pushing 100. So I grabbed my tools and headed up. The 6th floor hallway was hotter than it should have been. The air was thick and wrong, like breathing through a wet towel, and the lights were dimmer than I remembered. I knocked on 612, and the old woman let me in without a word. Her apartment was stifling. The windows were open, but there was no breeze, and the air just sat there, heavy and dead. The air conditioning unit was built into the wall, one of those old sleeve units that you can not just replace. You have to pull the whole assembly out from inside the utility corridor that runs behind the units. She pointed to it and sat back down in front of a fan that was just pushing hot air around. I told her I would have it running in 20 minutes. The access door to the utility corridor was in the hallway, on a narrow metal door that I'd walked past 100 times but never opened. The paint was chipped, and there was a small sign that said "Maintenance Only." I unlocked it and pulled it open, and the smell that came out was immediate and wrong. Mildew and something else. Something sour and organic. The corridor was narrow, maybe 2 feet wide, and it ran the entire length of the building behind all the apartments. There was a single bulb every 20 feet, dim and yellow, and between them, the darkness was total. I could see the back of the air conditioning units jutting out from the wall, metal boxes with pipes and wiring snaking everywhere. I stepped inside and pulled the door shut behind me because I did not want to let any more heat into the hallway. The corridor felt wrong the moment I stepped in. The air was cooler, but it was stale It's just like no one had been back there in years. The walls were bare concrete and the floor was uneven, sloping slightly in places where the foundation had settled. I had to walk hunched over because the ceiling was low and the pipes hung down in spots. I made my way to the 6th unit, counting the air conditioning boxes as I passed, and found the one that belonged to 612. It took me 15 minutes to find the problem. A belt had snapped and wrapped around the compressor. I replaced it and got the unit running again, and I was packing up my tools when I heard the sound. It came from deeper in the corridor, maybe 30 feet behind me, toward the far end of the building. A shuffling sound, slow and uneven. I stood completely still and listened. The air conditioning units were humming now, all of them, and underneath that hum I could hear it. Footsteps, dragging, like someone was walking but only lifting one foot at a time. I remembered what Carl said. Older tenants getting confused, wandering. I called out and asked if someone needed help. My voice sounded flat in the narrow space like the walls were swallowing it. The footsteps stopped. I waited. Then I heard breathing. Not labored, not panicked. Just slow and steady, like someone standing very still and listening to me the same way I was listening to them. I called out again and said I was maintenance, that I could help them get back to their apartment. The breathing continued. Then I heard a voice. It was low and calm, and it said, "You should not be here after dark." It was not the voice of a confused elderly person. It was measured, controlled, deliberate. Whereas I asked who was there, and the voice said it again, exactly the same way, like a recording playing back. "You should not be here after dark." I turned on my flashlight and aimed it down the corridor. The beam cut through the dark and I saw nothing. Just the long, narrow space and the metal boxes and the pipes. But I could still hear the breathing. Closer now, just maybe 20 feet away. I told them I was leaving and that they should come with me. The voice said, "I cannot leave. I have been here since the beginning." I did not wait to hear more. I grabbed my toolbox and moved toward the access door as quickly as I could without running. The floor was uneven and I had to step over pipes, and I kept my flashlight aimed forward because I did not want to turn around. I could hear the footsteps again behind me, faster now, matching my pace. Sachichi, the dragging sound was louder, and I could hear something else underneath it. A wet sound, like something being pulled through water. I reached the door and shoved it open and stepped out into the hallway and slammed it shut. I locked it. I stood there breathing hard, staring at the door, and I could hear something on the other side. Not footsteps, just stillness. Like someone standing right against the door waiting. "Where are you watching from? And are you watching alone? Subscribe and stay." I went back to my apartment and I called Carl. He did not answer. I left a message and told him what happened and asked him to call me back. He did not call that night. The next morning he showed up at my door at 6. He looked tired, older than I remembered. He asked me what exactly I heard and I told him everything. When I finished, he nodded slowly and said I did the right thing by leaving. Then he said something I will never forget. He said the building was constructed on the site of an old psychiatric facility that burned down in 1951. He said some of the patients were in the basement when it happened, and they never found all the remains. He said when they built Ridgemont, they poured the foundation right over the old basement and sealed it. He said sometimes the older tenants report hearing things in the walls, voices, Footsteps? He said he has heard them too. He said the utility corridors are the thinnest point between the building and what is underneath. I asked him why he did not tell me this before, and he said, because if I knew, I would not have taken the job. He said most of the time it is fine. He said just do not go back there after dark, and do not answer if something speaks to you. I asked him what happens if you answer, and he looked at me and said, then they know you can hear them, and they do not stop. I worked at Ridgemont for another 6 months. I followed the rules. I never went into the utility corridors after sunset, but 3 times I was in my basement apartment late at night, and I heard footsteps in the walls, slow and dragging. And twice I heard my name, not called out, just whispered, like someone practicing how to say it. The first time I heard it, I was sitting on my couch watching television, and the sound came from the wall behind me. My name, soft and drawn out. I turned off the television and listened. Nothing. Just silence. And the second time I was in bed and it came from the ceiling. My name again. The same voice. Low and calm. I started sleeping with the lights on. I started keeping the radio on all night just to have sound in the apartment. But it did not help. I would still hear it. And I started seeing things. Shadows moving in my peripheral vision. The feeling of being watched. I would wake up in the middle of the night and feel like someone was standing in the corner of my room, just out of sight. I would turn on the light and there would be nothing there, but the feeling would not go away. I moved out in March of 1977 and I did not give notice. I left the keys on the counter and I walked out, and I have never gone back. But sometimes, even now, I hear my name whispered in places where no one should know it. In the grocery store, in my car, in my apartment late at night. And I know that whatever was in those walls heard me answer once, and it has never forgotten. The mall was dying when I started working there in 1983. Not dead yet, but you could feel it. Half the stores had closed, and the ones that remained kept shorter hours. The anchor department stores were still operational, but the smaller shops were emptying out one by one, leaving behind dark storefronts with faded posters still taped to the windows. I was hired as part of the overnight maintenance crew, 4 of us total, and our job was to clean and repair after the mall closed at 9. The pay was decent and the work was mindless. Buffing floors, fixing broken fixtures, replacing burned-out lights in the long, empty corridors. The crew chief was a woman named Diane, who had been there since the mall opened in the 60s. She had a system and she did not like deviation. We each had a zone. Mine was the East Wing, 2nd floor. 3 anchor stores that were still operational and about 15 smaller shops, most of them vacant. The mall was different at night. The piped-in music shut off at 9:30, and after that the only sound was our equipment and the hum of the HVAC system. The lights stayed on, but they were dimmed to maybe 30%. Enough to see, but not enough to make the place feel alive. The mannequins in the department store windows looked wrong in that light. Their faces were too smooth, and their poses were too still, and sometimes when you walked past them quickly, you would swear they had moved just before you looked. Diane told us on the first night that if we saw anything unusual, we should report it to her immediately and not investigate on our own. She said the mall had a problem with squatters, and occasionally someone would hide in a store after closing and try to stay the night. She said security handled it, but we needed to be aware. I had been working there for about 5 weeks when I started noticing the smell. It was faint at first, just a whiff of something sour when I passed the old bookstore that had been closed for 2 years. The security gate was pulled down and locked, but you could still smell it seeping out from underneath. Then it got stronger. By the 3rd week, it was unmistakable. Something dead. Something rotting. I reported it to Diane, and she said she would have security check it out. 2 nights later, the smell was worse. I asked her if they had found anything, and she said no. She said sometimes the smell came from the ventilation system, that animals got stuck in the ducts and died. She said it would clear up eventually, but it did not clear up. It got worse, and it seemed to move. One night it would be strongest near the bookstore. The next night it would be near the jewelry shop 3 stores down. Then it would be near the restrooms at the end of the hall. I started to dread walking through certain sections of my zone because the smell was so thick it made my eyes water. And then I started hearing the footsteps. They were faint, just the sound of someone walking on the tile floor, sneakers squeaking slightly, the rhythm uneven like someone with a limp. I would hear them behind me, and I would turn around and there would be no one there. Wherein the hallway would be empty, stretching back into the dimness with nothing moving. I would hear them in the next corridor over, and I would walk to the intersection and look, and the hallway would be empty. I told Diane, and she said it was probably security making rounds. I said I had never seen security on the 2nd floor at night, and she said they moved quietly. She said not to worry about it. But I did worry, because the footsteps started following a pattern. They would start at the far end of the east wing, near the old bookstore, and they would move slowly toward wherever I was working. They would stop just out of sight. I would hear them get close, maybe 20 feet away, and then they would stop. And I would hear breathing, not heavy, just the sound of someone standing still and watching. When I started keeping my equipment cart between me and the direction of the sound, I started working faster so I could finish my zone and get out. Then one night in early November, I was buffing the floor near the fountain in the center courtyard when I saw her. She was standing in front of the old bookstore, maybe 50 feet away, just standing there in the dimmed light. She looked young, maybe 16 or 17, with long dark hair and clothes that looked old-fashioned. A dress that hung wrong on her frame, like it was too big or made for a different body. She was not moving, just standing there, facing the dark window of the bookstore. I called out and asked if she needed help. She did not respond. I called out again and said the mall was closed. She turned her head slowly and looked at me. Her face was wrong. I cannot explain it better than that. The proportions were off. The eyes were too far apart. The mouth was too wide. It looked like a face that someone had described but never actually seen. Like a drawing made from memory by someone who had forgotten what people really look like. She stared at me for maybe 5 seconds, and then she turned and walked into the bookstore. Not through the door. The security gate was down. She walked through the gate like it was not there. I stood there with the buffer still running, and I did not move. I counted to 10. Then I turned off the buffer and I walked to the bookstore. The gate was solid metal pulled down and locked. I looked through the gaps between the slats, and I could see the dark interior of the store. Shelves still lined with books that no one had bothered to remove. And I could see her, where she was standing in the back of the store, facing away from me, perfectly still. I knocked on the gate and called out. She did not move. I I watched her for a full minute and she did not move at all, not breathing, not shifting weight, just standing. I went to find Diane. She was on the first floor, and when I told her what I saw, she went very quiet. She asked me to describe the girl, and I did. When I finished, she closed her eyes and nodded. She said, "That is the third time this month." She said, "Security knows." She said, "The girl is not real." I asked her what she meant, and she said, "The mall was built over an old transit station that had a fire in 1961. She said 7 people died in the station, trapped underground when the exits collapsed. She said one of them was a girl who'd been reported missing 2 days before the fire. She said they found her remains in the tunnels, but they never identified her. She said people have been seeing her in the mall since it opened, always in the same area, always wearing the same dress. She said if you see her, you do not approach, you do not speak to her, you just finish your work and leave. I asked Diane why she did not tell me this when I was hired, and she said the same thing Carl had said years before, because I would not have taken the job. She said, most people never see her. She said, just ignore it and it will stop. But it did not stop. I saw her 4 more times over the next 2 weeks, always in the same area, always standing still. And the smell got worse, and the footsteps got closer. And one night I was cleaning the restroom at the end of the east wing, and I heard the door open behind me. I turned around and she was standing in the doorway, close enough that I could see the details now. The dress was burned. The edges were black and crumbling. Her skin was gray. Her eyes were not eyes, just in dark holes. She opened her mouth and said, "Help me." Her voice sounded like it was coming from very far away, like an echo in a tunnel. I did not answer. I remembered what Diane said. Do not speak to her. But she took a step forward and said it again. "Help me." I backed away and she kept coming. Slow steps, dragging slightly. The smell was overwhelming now, burned fabric and rotting meat. She reached out with one hand and I saw that her fingers were too long, the joints bending in places they should not. I shoved past her and ran. I ran down the east wing and I did not stop until I reached the main atrium where Diane was working. I told her what happened. She looked at me and said, "You are done for tonight. Go home." I never went back. I called the next day and quit over the phone. Diane did not try to convince me to stay. She just said she understood and hung up. The mall was demolished in 1998. I read about it in the paper. They said it was structurally unsound and had been losing money for years. They said during the demolition, they found remnants of the old transit station in the sub-basement. They said they found remains that had never been recovered. They said they were unable to identify them. I think about her sometimes. The girl in the burned dress, I think about what she wanted, and I think about the fact that she knew I could see her, and I wonder if she is still there, standing in the rubble, waiting for someone else to answer. I worked as a night janitor at Parkside Elementary from 1987 to 1989. It was a small school, maybe 200 kids, built in the early 70s in a neighborhood that was starting to decline. The paint on the exterior was fading and the playground equipment was rusting, and the parking lot had cracks running through it like spider webs. The job was simple. I had the building to myself from 6 in the evening until 2 in the morning. I cleaned classrooms, mopped hallways, emptied trash, and locked up when I left. The principal was a man named Mr. Harwick, and he gave me one instruction during my interview. Do not go into the art room in the basement. He said it was being renovated and the floor was unstable. He said it was locked and I didn't have a key and I should not try to get in. I said, fine, I did not care. I needed the job. The school had a strange layout. The main building was 2 floors with classrooms and offices, but there was a basement level that was mostly storage and mechanical rooms. The art room was down there, at the end of a long hallway that had no windows and only 2 overhead lights that buzzed constantly. The fluorescent tubes were old and they flickered sometimes, casting shadows that moved when nothing else did. I walked past it every night when I took the trash to the dumpster out back. The door was solid wood painted green with a small window at eye level covered from the inside with paper. There was a padlock on the outside. I never tried to look in. I had no reason to. But after about 3 months, I started noticing things, small things. The paper covering the window would be torn sometimes. Just a small rip, like someone had scratched at it from the inside. I would see it one night, and the next night it would be repaired. Then it would be torn again a few days later. I mentioned it to Mr. Harwick, and he said the contractors were working irregular hours, and I should not worry about it. But I never saw contractors. I never saw anyone in the building except myself. Then I started hearing sounds from the art room. Faint at first. A scraping sound like something being dragged across the floor. Then a tapping sound, rhythmic and slow. It would start around midnight and continue for 10 or 15 minutes and then stop. I put my ear to the door once and I could hear it clearly. Tap, tap, tap. Pause, tap, tap, tap. Pause. Now I knocked on the door and called out and asked if someone was in there. The tapping stopped immediately. I waited. Then I heard a voice. It was small and high, like a child, and it said, "Let me out." I stepped back from the door. I called out and asked who was there. The voice said, "I have been here a long time. Let me out." I told them I did not have a key and they needed to call someone. The voice said, "You can open it. Just take off the lock." I looked at the padlock. It was old and rusted, but it was secure. I told them I could not do that and they should wait until morning. The voice said, "Please. It is dark in here." I said I would call someone and I walked away. I called Mr. Harwick at home and told him what I heard. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Do not open that door. Do not go near it. I will handle it in the morning." He did not handle it. The next night the padlock was still there and the tapping started again at midnight. And the voice came again. "Let me out. Please." I ignored it. I finished my work on the upper floors and I avoided the basement entirely. But the voice got louder. It started calling out even when I was not near the door. I would be mopping the hallway on the 2nd floor and I would hear it echoing up the stairwell. "Let me out! Let me out! Let me out!" Over and over in that high child's voice. I confronted Mr. Harwick the next morning. I asked him what was in the art room and why it was locked. He looked at me and said it was none of my concern. He said if I could not handle the job, I could leave. I told him I heard a child's voice, and if there was a kid locked in there, I was calling the police. He stared at me for a long time, and then he sighed. He said there was no child. He said the art room had been closed since 1974. He said there was an incident. A student named Emily went missing during school hours. She was 8 years old. They searched the entire building and the surrounding area, and they never found her. He said 2 weeks later, the art teacher reported hearing scratching sounds coming from inside the storage closet in the art room. He said when they opened it, they found her. She had crawled into the closet during a game of hide and seek, and the door had jammed shut from the inside. She had been trapped for 2 weeks. She did not survive. He said after that they sealed the art room. He said no one had used it since. He said sometimes people reported hearing sounds. Scratching. Tapping. A child's voice. He said it was not real. He said it was the building settling or the pipes or people's imagination. He said I should ignore it and do my job. I asked him why the door was locked if there was nothing in there. He said, because people do not listen. I tried to ignore it, but the voice did not stop. It got more insistent, more desperate. Let me out. Please, I am scared. It is dark. I cannot breathe. And then one night in late January, the padlock was gone. I came down the stairs with a bag of trash and I looked at the art room door and the lock was not there. The door was still closed, but it was unlocked. I stood there staring at it. I knew I should not open it. I knew what Mr. Harwick said. But the voice started again from inside. Quieter now. Please help me, I am still here. I put my hand on the doorknob. It was cold. It's colder than it should have been. I turned it slowly and the door opened. The art room was dark. I could see shapes in the dimness. Tables, chairs, shelves. I reached for the light switch and flipped it. Nothing happened. The lights were dead. I pulled out my flashlight and shone it into the room. The beam cut through the dark and I saw the storage closet at the back of the room. The door was open, just a crack. I called out and asked if anyone was there. The voice said, I am here in the closet. I walked into the room. My footsteps echoed on the tile floor. I could smell something old and stale, dust and mildew and something else, something wrong. I reached the closet and I pulled the door open. The flashlight beam showed the inside. It was small, maybe 3 feet by 3 feet. Empty, no shelves, no supplies, just bare walls, itches and scratches. Deep gouges in the wood, running in frantic patterns, clustered near the door. Some of them were deep enough to have splintered the wood. I stood there looking at them and I felt something behind me. A presence. The air in the room changed, got colder. I turned around and I saw her. She was standing in the doorway of the art room. Small, maybe 8 years old. Pale skin, dark hair, wearing a dress that looked like it was from the 70s. She stared at me with eyes that were too wide and too dark. She said, "Why did you open the door?" I asked her who she was and she said, "You let me out. Now I can leave." I told her I did not understand and she smiled. It was not a child's smile. It was too wide and there was nothing behind it. No warmth, no life, just a stretching of the mouth. She said, "I've been waiting. Someone always opens the door." And then she turned and walked out of the room. I followed her into the hallway, but she was gone. The basement was empty. I quit the next morning. I told Mr. Harwick I was done, and I didn't give a reason. He did not ask. He just nodded like he had been expecting it. I heard later that the school hired a new janitor and he lasted 3 weeks. Then another one lasted a month. The school closed in 1992. Enrollment had dropped, and the building was too expensive to maintain. They tore it down in 95. But before they did, they found something in the art room. They found the storage closet had a false back. Behind it was a small crawl space that led to an old utility shaft. They found remains inside. A child's remains. They identified her as Emily Graves. They said she had crawled into the shaft thinking it was part of the closet and gotten stuck. They said she had been there since 1974, but that does not explain what I saw, because Emily was found in the shaft, not the closet, and what I saw walked out of that room on its own. And I have thought about it every day since. about what she said. Someone always opens the door, and I wonder who else has opened it and what else has walked out. The hospital hired me in 1992 to work the graveyard shift in maintenance. It was a regional facility, 8 floors, built in the 50s and expanded in the 70s, with a new wing that never quite matched the original structure. The new wing was modern and clean, with wide hallways and bright lights. And the old wing looked like it belonged to a different era. Narrow corridors, dark wood trim, tile floors that had been patched and repatched over the years. My shift ran from midnight to 8 in the morning, and my duties were straightforward. Respond to maintenance requests, check the mechanical systems, handle any emergencies that came up overnight. The pay was good and the work was steady. The supervisor was a man named Donald who had been there for 20 years, and he walked me through the building on my first night. He showed me the boiler room, the electrical panels, the supply closets, and then he showed me the old wing. The old wing was the original hospital building, mostly unused now except for storage. The patient rooms had been emptied and the equipment had been moved to the new wing. And Donald said, we still had to check it once a night to make sure the heating and cooling systems were running and there were no leaks or issues. He said it was quiet and there was nothing to worry about. He said just walk the halls, check the rooms, and get out. He said it should take 20 minutes. He did not tell me anything else. The old wing felt different from the rest of the hospital. The floors were older, the walls were a different color, and the smell was sharper. Disinfectant and age. The lights were dimmed at night and the hallways were long and empty. Most of the doors were closed, but some were propped open and I could see into the empty rooms. Hospital beds with no mattresses. Curtains hanging limp. I did my checks every night and I never saw anything unusual. But I felt watched. It was a persistent feeling, like someone just out of sight was tracking my movement. I told myself it was the isolation, the quiet. The way sound carried strangely in the empty corridors. After 2 months, I started noticing the smell. It was faint at first, just a hint of something underneath the disinfectant. Something organic and wrong. I thought maybe it was a plumbing issue or something in the ventilation. I checked the bathrooms and the utility closets, but I could not find a source. The smell got stronger. It was worst on the 3rd floor of the old wing, near the end of the east hallway. I reported it to Donald and he said he would look into it. A week later, the smell was still there. Stronger now? He said he had checked and there was no plumbing issue. He said it was probably just the building. Old hospitals smell like that sometimes, but it was not just the smell. I started hearing sounds, faint at first. The squeak of wheels on linoleum, the sound of a bed being rolled down the hallway. I would hear it, and I would turn toward the sound, and there would be nothing there, just the empty hallway. I would hear voices, low murmuring, like people talking in the next room. I would open the door, and the room would be empty. I told Donald, and he said, old buildings make noise. He said the pipes, the ventilation, the structure settling. He said not to let it get to me. Then I started seeing the lights. They would flicker in the rooms I was checking. Not random flickering. Deliberate, on and off in a pattern. 3 quick flashes, pause. 3 quick flashes. I would walk into a room and the overhead light would flash and I would look up and it would stop. I started moving faster through the old wing. I wanted to finish my checks and get out. But the lights followed me, room after room. flashing as I passed. And then one night in March, I was checking the 3rd floor and I saw the gurney. It was in the hallway, halfway down the east corridor. An old hospital gurney with rusted wheels and a thin mattress. It had not been there when I started my check 10 minutes earlier. I stopped and stared at it. I called out and asked if anyone was there. No response. I walked toward the gurney slowly. The wheels were locked. The mattress had a stain on it, dark and old. I reached out to push it back to wherever it had come from, and the gurney moved. Not from me. It rolled backward on its own, slowly, the wheels squeaking. I let go and stepped back. The gurney continued rolling backward down the hallway, 8 yards away from me until it reached the last room at the end of the hall. Then it stopped. The door to that room was closed. I had checked it earlier and it was empty. I did not want to open that door. But I had to know. I walked down the hallway and I put my hand on the doorknob. It was cold. Colder than metal should be in a heated building. I opened the door and looked inside. The room was dark. I flipped the light switch and the overhead light flickered on. The gurney was in the center of the room, and there was someone on it. A figure covered with a sheet, the outline of a body clearly visible. I stood in the doorway and I did not move. I called out. No response. I stepped into the room and I reached for the sheet. I pulled it back. There was nothing there, just the mattress, no body, no stain, nothing. Yet I stood there, staring at the empty gurney, and I heard the door close behind me. I turned around and the door was shut. I tried the handle, it was locked. I pounded on the door and called for help. No one came. I pulled out my radio and called Donald, static. I called again. Nothing. I was about to kick the door when I heard the sound behind me, the squeak of wheels. I turned around and the gurney was moving again, slowly, rolling toward me. I backed against the door and the gurney kept coming. It stopped a foot away from me, and I heard a voice. It was low and wet, like someone speaking through fluid. It said, "You should not be here." I did not answer. The voice said, "This floor is not for the living." I asked who was there, and the voice said, "We died here, in these rooms. We are still here." The gurney began to shake, not violently, just a low vibration, the metal frame rattling. The overhead light began to flicker. 3 quick flashes, pause, 3 quick flashes. I tried the door again, and this time it opened. I shoved it open and I ran. I ran down the hallway and I didn't look back. I heard the gurney following me, the wheels squeaking, faster now, gaining. I reached the stairwell and I threw open the door and ran down the stairs 2 at a time. I did not stop until I reached the main lobby of the hospital. Donald found me there 20 minutes later. I told him what happened. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "The 3rd floor used to be the terminal ward." He said in the 70s and 80s that was where they put patients who were not going to recover. He said a lot of people died on that floor. He said there were complaints from staff even back then. Sounds, lights, things moving. He said they closed it in 1989 and moved everything to the new wing. He said some of the maintenance staff refused to go up there. He said if I wanted to quit, he would understand. I did not quit. I needed the job. But I stopped checking the 3rd floor. I did my rounds on the other floors and I skipped it. Donald never said anything. But the sounds did not stop. I would hear them from the stairwell, the squeaking wheels, the voices, and sometimes late at night I would see the lights flickering in the windows of the third floor from the parking lot. 3 quick flashes. Pause. 3 quick flashes. I worked there until 1995. I left when I found a better job. But I still think about that floor, about the gurney, about what the voice said. This floor is not for the living, and I know that whatever is up there is still waiting, still moving through those empty halls, still looking for someone who will stay. I worked apartment maintenance in a sprawling complex outside the city from 1997 to 1999. 300 units spread across 15 buildings, built in the late 80s during a boom that went bust right after. The place was half empty by the time I got there, and the management company was trying to fill units with anyone who could pay first and last. That meant we got tenants who could not get approved anywhere else. People with bad credit, people with evictions, people with histories. My job was to keep the units functional and deal with whatever the tenants broke or complained about. During the crew was just me and a guy named Rick, who had been there since the complex opened. Rick was in his 50s, quiet, and he knew the property inside and out. He told me on my first day that some of the buildings had problems. He did not elaborate. I learned what he meant after a few weeks. Building 7 had constant plumbing issues. Building 12 had electrical problems that no one could diagnose. And Building 9 had the turnover. Tenants would move into Building 9 and be gone within 3 months, sometimes sooner. The units were fine, nothing obviously wrong with them, but people did not stay. I asked Rick about it, and he said, Building 9 was just unlucky. He said some places are like that. I did not push it. In October, I got a call from a tenant in Building 9, Unit 203. She said her bathroom sink was not draining and there was a smell coming from the pipes. I told her I would be there in an hour. When I knocked on her door, she opened it halfway and looked at me like she was deciding whether to let me in. She was maybe 30, thin, with dark circles under her eyes. She let me in without saying anything and pointed to the bathroom. The apartment was sparse. Just a couch and a small table. No pictures, no personal items. It looked like she had just moved in, even though the lease sheet said she had been there for 6 weeks. The bathroom sink was clogged and the smell was immediate. Sulfur and rot. I pulled the trap and cleared the blockage, mostly hair and soap scum, and the water drained. But the smell did not go away. It was coming from deeper in the pipes. I told her I would need to check the main line, and she just nodded. She did not say anything else. I finished up and left. 2 days later, she called again. Same problem. Sink would not drain, same smell. I went back and cleared it again. This time I noticed something. The bathroom mirror was cracked. A long, splintering crack running from the top corner to the center. I asked her what happened, and she said it was like that when she moved in. I checked my notes. It was not. The unit had been inspected and photographed before she moved in, and the mirror was intact. I did not say anything. I fixed the sink and left. She called 4 more times over the next 2 weeks. Always the same problem, always the same smell, and each time I went back, the apartment looked worse. The mirror had more cracks. The walls had scuff marks, like something had been dragged against them. And she looked worse, thinner, more exhausted. I asked her if everything was okay, and she said she was not sleeping well. She said she heard noises at night, scratching in the walls, footsteps in the apartment above her, even though the unit above hers was vacant. I told her I would check it out. I went up to Unit 303 and unlocked the door. The apartment was empty and dark. I walked through each room and checked for signs of animals or water damage or anything that could explain the sounds. Nothing. The place was clean. I was about to leave when I noticed the closet in the bedroom. The door was open and there was a smell coming from inside. The same sulfur and rot smell from her bathroom. I opened the closet fully and looked inside. It was empty, except for a small access panel in the back wall. The panel was loose. I pulled it off and shone my flashlight into the opening. There was a crawl space behind the wall, narrow and dark. I could see insulation and pipes running through it. And I could see something else, something bundled in the corner. Fabric. I reached in and pulled it out. It was a blanket, old and stained, wrapped around something solid. I unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a doll. Not a child's toy, a mannequin-sized figure, crudely made with a wooden frame and fabric stretched over it. The face was painted on, eyes too large, mouth open in a wide smile. The hands were twisted wire, and there was writing on the torso, scratched into the fabric with something sharp. Names, dozens of names. I recognized one of them. The tenant in 203, which her name was there. I took the doll and the blanket, and I went back downstairs. I knocked on her door, and when she answered, I showed her what I found. Her face went white. She stared at it, and then she looked at me and said, "Where did you find that?" I told her. She backed away from the door and said, "You need to get rid of it. Burn it. Do not keep it in the building." I asked her what it was, and she said, "Someone lived here before me, in this unit, a woman." She told me about her when I moved in. She said the woman practiced something. She made those dolls. She said she could put people into them, trap them. The woman disappeared 2 years ago. No one knows where she went. But people have been seeing things in this building ever since. Hearing things. She said every tenant who has lived in this unit has left within a month. She said she is leaving too. Tonight. I told her I would handle it. I took the doll outside and I burned it in the maintenance yard. It did not burn easily. The fabric smoldered and the wood frame resisted the flame. But eventually it caught and I watched it burn down to ash. I thought that would be the end of it. But that night I got a call from Rick. He said Building 9 was on fire. I drove back to the complex and I could see the smoke from a mile away. Fire trucks were already there. The entire second floor of Building 9 was engulfed. I found Rick standing in the parking lot watching. I asked him what happened, and he said it started in Unit 203. He said the tenant was not inside. She had moved out that afternoon. He said the fire spread fast. Too fast. He said by the time the fire department arrived, it had already gutted half the building. They put it out eventually, but Building 9 was a total loss. The management company demolished it 3 months later. I quit shortly after that. I could not shake the feeling that I had made a mistake. That burning the doll had done something, released something. I drive past the complex sometimes. Building 9 is gone. Just an empty lot now, but the other buildings are still there. Still half empty. And I've heard from people who work there now that Building 12 has the turnover now. Tenants leave within weeks. They complain about smells, sounds, and sometimes they say they see a woman in the hallways, thin, pale, with dark circles under her eyes, watching them. I do not know if it is the same woman who made the dolls. I do not know if she is still there. But I know that some things do not stay buried. And I know that whatever was in Building 9 is still in that complex. moving from building to building, waiting for someone to notice. And I will never go back.
Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more stories.